Hi folks, welcome to A Formula for Success. My name is Dr. Anthony W. Adams, and I'm glad that you're here because we have an exciting study that we're going to be talking about that I think is going to make a real difference in your life. To start with, there was a telemarketer who recently phoned a home and said, "I'd like to talk to the person who makes the final purchasing decisions for your family." Well, the woman replied, "I'm sorry. That person is still at kindergarten and won't be home for another hour." I recently heard a sermon where the speaker introduced the familiar acronym HALT. Now, for those that aren't familiar with that, it's an acronym that reminds people of various mindsets that can cause poor decision making. The acronym stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And when you have any of those factors or a combination of those factors, it can lead to poor decision making. So I want to take just a few moments and I'd like to discuss these four mindsets in some detail and how they can be detrimental to good decision making. So we're going to start with the first one, and the first one we're going to deal with is the H in HALT, H, which is hungry. I want you just to imagine deciding on a major purchase or having a serious conversation right before lunch with a rumbling stomach. You might agree to the very first suggestion just so that you can get some lunch, to get a burger or a salad, only to regret it later. The fact is, hunger can distract you from what is really important. It's like asking for a lifetime supply of snacks instead of a raise. All of that's a potential consequence of being hungry. It's like going to the store, and you're going to the store maybe for one thing, and you end up coming out with all kinds of ice cream and chips and all kinds of other things because you went in hungry. The point is, sometimes you can be hungry and it can cause you to make bad decisions. Have you ever found yourself irritable, agitated, short-tempered with people around you? You say things you shouldn't say. This is, again, a consequence sometimes of being hangry, as they say. I'll give you an example of this. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. You know why he did that? Because he was hungry. He prioritized the immediate gratification over a long-term blessing. Notice how he rationalized this. You can see this in Genesis 25 and 32. He says, "Look, I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" Now, understand this. Esau's a great hunter. He could have found something to eat. He could have found something to kill. Surely there was something, even at his parents' home, that he could have eaten. But what happened was, this exaggerated the problem. It distorted the complexity and the amount of the problem, and it caused him to feel like that it was just overwhelming. And because of this, it caused him to make a poor decision. A decision, by the way, that he couldn't go back on. You find it in the book of Hebrews 12 and 17. It says that later on he wanted that blessing back, and he looked for ways in which he could have gotten it, but he could not change what he had done. So the point that I'm saying here is that hunger can negatively affect your decision making. So let me just give you a word of advice on this. And that is, number one, and this may sound very, very simple, but you need to be very careful when you schedule your meetings. And I think also, not only should you be careful, okay, this is right before lunch, maybe I'm going to be hungry, or whatever the case is. Something else too, and that is that you need to be self-aware of your mental and physical state before making decisions. Why is that? Because, as simple as it is, sometimes being hungry can affect your decision making. Okay, so that's the first one, and HALT is hunger. The second mindset that can cause poor decision making is being angry. That's the A, and HALT, angry. The writer of Proverbs, chapter 14, verse 29, and this is in the New Living Translation. It says, those who control their anger have great understanding. Listen to this. But those with a hasty temper will make mistakes. How often has this scenario happened? You got angry, you said the wrong thing, you did the wrong thing, you made the wrong decision, and the consequences proved to be extremely costly. For husbands, it often equates to the silent treatment, the cold shoulder. With our kids, and especially our teenagers, because with teens, you got to work at keeping those lines of communications open. And how often does being angry cause us to say something or to do something that just cuts off our line of communication? Anger can be very costly. And unchecked anger can have devastating consequences in terms of our decision making. Let me give you an example from the Bible. Cain and Abel. And, most of you, I think, know the story. Cain was a farmer, and so Cain took some of the produce that he had grown in the fields, and he took that and he brought that, and he made a sacrifice with that to the Lord. Abel, who tended sheep, took some of the fat from the firstlings of the flock, and he offered that to the Lord. And the Lord had favor, or looked with favor, upon Abel's sacrifice, but not with Cain's. This really angered Cain. He was upset about this. He was mad. Well, when this happened, the Lord came and spoke to Cain about the situation. But Cain was so angry, and this is important. Cain was so angry that he failed to be able to listen to the Lord. This is one of the things that happens. When we're angry, we have a tendency to close off our ability to listen and to try to understand what someone else is saying. So he was very angry, and he didn't listen to the Lord, and he walked out of that meeting to make the worst decision of his life. He killed his brother. Many years ago, a senior executive from the Standard Oil Company had made a wrong decision that cost the company more than $2 million. Now, you would say, $2 million to an oil company, that's nothing. Well, back then, it was an astronomical amount of money. John D. Rockefeller was then running the company, and on the day the news leaked out, most of the executives of the company were finding various ingenious ways of avoiding Rockefeller, lest his wrath would find their way of falling on their heads. And so they did everything they could to avoid this. But there was one exception. Edward T. Bedford, a partner in the company. Bedford, you see, was scheduled to have a meeting with Rockefeller that day, and he kept the appointment, even though he was prepared to listen to the long diatribe about this man and the error in judgment that he made. Well, when Bedford entered the office, the powerful head of the gigantic Standard Oil empire was bent over his desk, and he was busily writing with a pencil and a pad of paper. And Bedford just stood silently because he didn't want to interrupt. But after a few minutes, Rockefeller looked up. "Oh, it's you, Bedford," he said calmly, and he said, "I suppose you've heard about our loss." Bedford said that he had. Rockefeller said, "I've been thinking it over. Before I asked the man to discuss the matter, I've been making some notes." Bedford said the following. He said, across the top of the page was written points in favor of Mr. whoever it was. There followed a long list of the man's virtues, including a brief description of how he had helped the company make the right decision on 3 separate occasions that had earned many times the cost of his recent error. He said, "I never forgot that lesson. In later years, whenever I was tempted to rip into anyone, I forced myself first to sit down and thoughtfully compile as long a list of good points as I possibly could. Invariably, by the time I finished my inventory, I would see the matter in its true perspective and keep my temper under control. There is no telling how many times this habit has prevented me from committing one of the costliest mistakes any executive can make: losing his temper." Remember, the Bible says, "Be angry and sin not." Why is that? Because anger can lead to poor decision making. So we need to be careful. We need to be careful with being hungry. We need to be careful with being angry. And the third thing in H.A.L.T is lonely. I believe that loneliness is rampant in our society. In fact, I read a statistic a few years back that said that 75% of all people experience loneliness regularly. And unfortunately, loneliness can cause poor decision making. It reminds me of a woman whose husband suddenly died after more than 40 years of marriage. For several months, she sat in the house with the shades pulled and the doors locked. And finally, she decided she needed to do something about her situation. The loneliness was killing her. She remembered that her husband had a friend who owned a nice pet store, and she thought a pet might be good company. So she dropped in one afternoon to look over the selection. She looked at dogs, she looked at cats, she looked at goldfish, even snakes. But nothing seemed quite right. She told the store owner she wanted a pet that could be a real companion, almost like another human being was there in the house. And suddenly he thought of one of his prized parrots. He showed her the colorful bird. Well, does it talk? Absolutely. A real chatterbox. Everybody who comes to the store is astounded by the parrot's friendly disposition and wide vocabulary. That's why it's so expensive. Sold, she said. She bought the expensive parrot, hauled it home in a large, elegant cage, and finally she had a companion she could talk to who could answer back. Perfect. But there was a problem. A full week passed without the bird saying one word. Beginning to worry, she dropped by the pet shop. "How's the parrot doing? Quite the talker, huh?" Not one word. "I haven't been able to get a sound out of that bird. I'm worried." "Well, did you buy a mirror when you bought the parrot in the cage last week?" Mirror? No, there's no mirror in the cage. Well, that's your problem. A parrot needs a mirror. It's funny, but while looking at itself, a parrot starts to feel comfortable. In no time, it will begin to talk. With a deep sigh, she went and she bought the mirror and put it into the cage. Well, time passed. Still nothing. Each day the woman talked to the bird, but not a peep came out of its beak. For hours on end she would talk as the parrot stared in silence. Another week passed, and not a word. By now she was really getting worried. The parrot isn't talking, she told the pet store owner. I'm worried. All the money, the mirror, and the cage, and still nothing. Say, did you buy a ladder when you got the cage? A ladder? No, I didn't. I didn't know I needed a ladder. Well, will that even make that parrot talk? Works like a charm. The parrot will look in the mirror and get a little exercise climbing up and down this ladder several times. Before long, you won't believe what you hear. Trust me, you need a ladder. So she bought a ladder, and she put it into the cage next to the mirror and waited, and waited, and waited. Another 7, 8 days, and still nothing, and by now her worry was beginning to approach panic stage. Why doesn't it talk? That was all she could think about. She returned to the store in tears with the same complaint. He said, well, did you buy a swing? A swing? No, I didn't buy a swing. I have a cage. I have a mirror. I have a ladder. I thought I had everything. I had no idea I needed a swing. Well, you gotta have a swing. A parrot needs to feel completely at home. It glances in the mirror, takes a stroll up and down the ladder, and before long, it's on the swing enjoying itself, and bingo! I found the parrots usually talk when they're perched on a swing. You need a swing. So the woman bought the swing. She attached it to the top of the cage near the ladder and coaxed the parrot up the ladder and onto the swing. Still, absolute silence. For another 10 days, not one sound came from the cage. And suddenly she came bursting into the pet store, really steamed. The owner met her at the counter. Hey, how's my parrot? I'll bet it died. My expensive bird is dead in the bottom of the cage. The pet store owner said, well, I can't believe that. I'm just shocked. Did it ever say anything at all? Yes, as a matter of fact, it did. As it lay there, taking its last few breaths, it said very faintly, don't they have any food down at that store? Sometimes loneliness can keep you from seeing clearly what should have been obvious. If you think about David and Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapter 11, this is where David was up on his roof, and he looked down and he saw Bathsheba taking a bath, and so on and so forth. What's interesting about that is that there's a possibility that David, a part of what contributed to this, besides the fact that she was taking a bath on the roof, is the fact that he was lonely. David remained in Jerusalem instead of going to war with the rest of his army. And this led to sinful actions. What I'm telling you is that sometimes loneliness will cause us to make poor decisions. And the final thing on H.A.L.T, not only will being hungry sometimes cause you to make poor decisions, being angry can cause you to make poor decisions, being lonely can cause you to make poor decisions. Sometimes being tired can cause you to make poor decisions. Sometimes fatigue can cause you to be irritable with family and coworkers. You just all of a sudden you're just snapping at people, and you're saying things you shouldn't say. Fatigue can also cause you to make silly mistakes and overlook critical things. I do a lot of writing. I write workbooks for certifications. I write a lot of emails to various colleges and other people in various educational formats, as well as other things. And one of the things that I do when I'm writing is that after I get done with the project, I will then force myself to take a break. Many times I like to wait for usually wait until the next day and then come back. And I am usually shocked at how many typographical errors that I made. And especially if I was tired when I was writing it, or I got tired as I was writing it. There is nothing worse, and that's a bit of a hyperbole, I know, but there is nothing that is so bad as to have an important email or message that you are sending to someone, and you go ahead and send it, and later on you read and you see a bunch of typos. Because it reflects on you, it reflects on who you are, and it reflects on how important you feel like the person that you're sending that email or that message to is. It's like writing a speech after an all-nighter and waking up with several coffee mugs around you to find you've written a dramatic monologue about the plight of the coffee machine. I would remind you that Samson succumbed to Delilah's nagging and revealed the secret of his strength after he had been worn down by her persistent demands. He got tired. And what this illustrates is how physical and emotional exhaustion can impair judgment and lead to compromise. So, what's my point? Seneca said, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Self-care means giving yourself permission to pause. I want you to remember when you have to make some decisions, some big decisions that could possibly affect whether you're successful or not, that maybe you need to halt. Are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? All of those things can be detrimental to your decision making. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to A Formula for Success. And listen, if you get a chance, go to our website. It's right there on the screen. Check it out. We have some wonderful certifications. In fact, we got a brand new certification that we just finished. It is financial management. Listen, if you are involved in making financial decisions, maybe you are a CFO, or maybe you desire to be a CFO, you need this certification. It is a tremendous thing. It deals in 5 areas, 4 major areas that has to do with finance. I guarantee you it will help you to be successful and to do what God has destined you to do. Hey, listen, until next time, I'm Dr. Anthony Adams. God bless you.